Well, welcome everybody. Sorry about that little hiccup. Welcome to the first Friday lecture for the month of September. Our speaker today and my Zoom assistant is basic program instructor and recent basic program chair, Kendall Sharp. Kendall's lecture is entitled Introduction to the Rigveda and the Upanishads. This first Friday lecture is supported by the Anastoplo Lecture Series Fund in memory of basic program instructor George Anastoplo. My name is Noah Shafitz, and since Kendall rotated out of the job in July, I have been the Cyril O'Hoole Chair of the basic program. Please note that this presentation is being recorded so that we can make it available on the Graham School YouTube channel early next week. During the lecture and during the question and answer period that follows it, you will not be able to unmute your microphones, but we invite you to enter questions for Kendall into the chat box at any time during today's event. Kendall will have a chance to respond to your questions after his lecture. During the lecture, Kendall and I will be able to see only a handful of your video feeds, so you may choose to leave your video on or turn it off as you wish. Kendall's video will be spotlighted, so the best way to view the lecture is to select speaker view instead of gallery view. Before I properly introduce Kendall, let me tell you a little bit about the basic program and the Graham School of Continuing Liberal and Professional Studies at the University of Chicago. Soon after my introduction, I will post links with more information in the Zoom chat box. Along with the basic program, the Graham School offers an array of programming across the liberal arts, including our Masters of Liberal Arts program and our open enrollment courses, as well as a number of events and travel study opportunities. Since 1946, the basic program has provided our students a rigorous liberal arts curriculum based on the principle of direct engagement with original texts. At the heart of the basic program is our 4-year course sequence, which offers direct encounters with some of the greatest works of the classical and Western traditions in a dedicated community of adult learners and in courses led by experienced University of Chicago educated instructors. Registration is now open for autumn quarter courses, and our sections have a tendency to fill up. So if you haven't registered yet, I recommend that you do so as soon as you can. Our next First Friday lecture will take place on October 4th, when our speaker will be basic program instructor Simon Friedland. The title of Simon's lecture will be Goethe's Hope. Today's speaker, Kendall Sharp, joined the basic program instructional staff in 2019. Kendall holds a PhD from the Committee on Social Thought and a BA from the College at the University of Chicago. Formerly, he was assistant professor in the Department of Classical Studies at the University of Western Ontario. He has also taught at DePaul University, the University of Illinois Chicago, and in the college at the University of Chicago. From 2020 to 2024, Kendall served 2 terms as the Cyril O'Hoole Chair of the Basic Program of Liberal Education for Adults. And if you ask me, he set a very high bar doing it. His teaching and research interests are wide, but they have a focus on ancient Greek literature, philosophy, history, myth, and art and architecture. During our upcoming autumn quarter, Kendall will be teaching in the new Asian Classical Traditions alumni sequence in the basic program, in which he'll be leading students in discussions of the 2 texts to which he will introduce all of us today, the Rigveda and the Upanishads. All right, thank you for your attention. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand things over to Kendall.
Thank you, Noah. Great introduction. Well done. I'm getting a message that my unstable drops now and then. So Noah, if it becomes too unstable, please chime in and tell me, and I'll back up in my text. Okay.
Yes, I've got it.
Because I can't tell how disjointed it gets. Okay. Anyway, so I'm here. I'll start my share. All righty. So You'll notice that my title is a little bit different than what Noah represented. My title says Introduction to the Rigveda. That's because we'll just get to where the Upanishads could be introduced after the end of my talk today. And the end of my talk, I must say, comes out at 44 minutes. So it's a little on the long side for one of these talks. So without further ado, let me get started. Today, I want to introduce you to the texts, the authors, and the peoples who produced the Rigveda. The Rigveda confronts American readers with an urgent need for a fairly full introduction. So I propose instead that we jump right into one particular Rigvedic hymn after only minimal introduction. That way, I hope your appetite will be whetted for explanation about how the imagery and poetic diction that you're about to hear all makes sense, indeed urgent sense, to the people who composed and performed these hymns. Then we will spend the rest of our time with a fuller introduction to these texts and their authors and home culture. So really quick introduction, then a Rigvedic hymn, and then a more full introduction. So here is some bullet points that is the minimum that you need to know to get started reading and understanding and enjoying the Rigveda. So they date to the Bronze Age, the second millennium, half rough 1500 BC, and they seem to have stopped being 1000
Kendall,
BC.
you might want to back up a few sentences. We just had a little lag.
For ancient India, it was the northern part. That's present day Pakistan and southern Afghanistan. Yes? What's back up, you say?
Yeah, you might want to back up at this point 6 or 7 sentences.
To the geography where they were is present day Pakistan and southern Afghanistan. The hymns themselves are scripts to be chanted by one of 7 priests who attend during a Vedic sacrifice. So the sacrifice is always part of what's going on. The authors of these hymns, they are called both poets and seers. Religious function, they're priestly. The peoples themselves called themselves the Aryans or Aryans, which meant the settled peoples whom they invaded. They lived the lifestyle of pastoral nomadic herders. They had giant herds of cattle and sheep and goats, and in their culture, cattle defined value. And don't forget that'll be important later. They also valued horses very much because horses help you control herds because it makes you taller than the cows, but it also helps you protect your herds from cattle raiders. And when you go raiding yourself, it helps you to augment your own herd by stealing other people's cattle. The ancestors Rigvedic composers the chariot, and the chariot was originally a sacrifice that I talked about previously. I said there were 7 priests. Well, they are sponsored. The whole sacrifice is sponsored by a patron, and this person comes from the specialized warrior class. And he's there at the sacrifice. He is called the sacrificer. And he does not chant the hymn or compose the hymn. There's a basic social format, a group that's assumed in the hymns, and I call it the hero plus friends format. And the mythical archetype for this social format is Indra. He's the #1 Vedic god, and his posse, his group of guys, are called the Maruts or the Meruts. And these guys, when they are getting ready to go on a cattle raid or to do some combat, they drink a herbal or an herbal beverage that was called Soma. And it was quite frankly a consciousness altering drug, and it seems to have made them feel jacked up for cattle raiding or combat. The plant is gone. Extinct for 3,000 years now, but figure that it must be some form of ephedra, which grows wild in that area. And finally, the hymns themselves, they are verbally complex. That's one of the reasons that they reward study. They use metaphor, of course, symbolism, but especially homology, which I'll get into as we discuss the hymn that we're about to read. And so this hymn is, well, let me transition. I need to set it up first. One more further point of introduction is that you have to know the hymn. I'm sorry, you have to know the myth to understand the hymn, because the hymn is not going to tell us the myth. Much like students who come to Homer's Iliad for the first time, they're thrown off because the poet seems to assume that you know who the various gods are and what their abilities and everything is. So the basic myth that this hymn will retail is the main myth of the god named Indra. And as I mentioned, Indra is the chief god in the Rigveda. So according to this myth, in the beginning, the waters needed to grow, the waters that you need for grass to grow in the steppe land, the Central Eurasian steppe land, to support your massive herds of cattle. All of this water was dammed up by a dragon named Vrtra. And please know that in myth, a dragon means snake. So not the fire-breathing kind, but a giant snake. It seems that Vrtra is a giant cobra in particular. It's never said expressly what mechanism Vrtra uses to dam up the waters, but it seems like somehow he blocks them in with his big giant body. Perhaps he's coiled up. His name means, or came to stand for, the concept of obstacle. Any obstacle which the community may face, especially as regards owning and maintaining cattle. Indra killed the dragon. When Indra killed the dragon, he released the waters, he freed the waters to flow for the benefit of mankind. Now, a few moments ago, I mentioned that they're verbally complex and that they use homology, the literary device of that name, which is sort of like metaphor and allegory together, such that frequently when you see the myth of Indra killing Vrtra, the waters that get released are said to be cattle herds that were penned up unjustly, and they're now free to gambol towards humankind to benefit us. So now let's jump directly into this hymn. It's one of the more prominent ones out of 1,000, slightly more than 1,000 hymns. This is one of the highlights. It comes from Book 1. I'll talk about the book system in a little bit. And its author was named Stupa Angirasa. Now, this last name, now, first of all, I'll give you a moment to pick your jaw up off the floor, because, yes, we know the poets' names. These are not anonymous. These people lived like 3,500 years ago. This particular poet's last name, Angirasa, this is also a type name. Like if it doesn't have a capital A, you translate it as poet sometimes, or priest sometimes. Let's see here. So this hymn is from Book 1, and the translation that I'm going to read is the one from the book that we'll use in class this autumn, and the translation is done by Wendy Doniger, a longtime scholar of Sanskrit, a professor here at the University of Chicago, and also for 30 plus years a friend of the Graham School. So many people know Wendy, but here is well, I'm gonna read the hymn. Let me now sing the heroic deeds of Indra, the first that the thunderbolt wielder performed. He killed the dragon and pierced an opening for the waters. He split open the bellies of mountains. He killed the dragon who lay upon the mountain. Tavastra fashioned the roaring thunderbolt for him. Like lowing cows, the flowing waters rushed straight down to the sea. Wildly excited, like a bull, he took the Soma for himself and drank the extract from the 3 bowls in the 3-day Soma ceremony. Indra the generous seized his thunderbolt to hurl it as a weapon. He killed the firstborn of dragons. Indra, when you killed the firstborn of dragons and overcame, by your own magic, the magic of the magicians, at that very moment you brought forth the sun, the sky, and dawn. Since then you have found no enemy to conquer you. With his great weapon, the thunderbolt, Indra translation killed Vrtra with his spread, whose branches have been lopped off by an axe. The dragon lies flat upon the ground. 4, muddled by drunkenness like one who is no soldier, Vrtra challenged the great hero who had overcome the mighty and who drank Soma to the dregs. Unable to withstand the onslaught of his weapons, he found Indra, an enemy to conquer him, and was shattered, his nose crushed. Without feet or hands, he fought against Indra, who struck him on the nape of the neck. Steer who wished to become the equal of with seed, broken in many places. Over him, as he lay there like a broken reed, the swelling waters flowed for man. Those waters that Vrtra had enclosed with his power, the dragon now lay at their feet. The vital energy of Vrtra's mother ebbed away, for Indra had hurled his deadly weapon at her. Above, below was the sun. Danu lay down like a cow with her calf. In the midst of the channels of the waters, which never body has been hidden. The waters flow over Vrtra's secret place. He who found Indra, an enemy to conquer him, sank into long darkness. The waters, who had the Dasa for their husband, the dragon for their protector, were imprisoned like the cows imprisoned by the Panis. When he killed Vrtra, he split open the outlet of the waters that had been closed. Indra, you became a hair of a horse's tail. When Vrtra struck you on the corner of the mouth, you, the one god, the brave one, you won the cows. You won the Soma. You released the 7 streams so that they could flow. No use was the lightning and thunder, fog and hail that he had scattered about when the dragon and Indra fought. The generous remained victorious for all time to come. What avenger of the dragon did you see, Indra, that fear entered your heart when you had killed him? Then you crossed the 99 streams like the frightened eagle crossing the realms of earth and air. Indra, who wields the thunderbolt in his hand, is the king of that which moves and that which rests, of the tame and of the horned. He rules the people as their king, encircling all this as a rim encircles spokes. And that's the end of it. And when you the Rigveda or the Upanishads say all this, it might be translated not literally as the universe, but that's what it means. Indra encircles the universe as a rim encircles spokes. I've said that this hymn, like any Vedic hymn, was composed to be chanted at the sacrifice. That fact can help us understand what is going on in each line of this hymn. The hymn's content, has a specific purpose that is embedded in the entire life world of the poet and his patron. Consider the opening words. Back to them. Consider the opening words. Let me now sing the heroic deeds of Indra. The reader who is under-informed about Vedic law now, especially why he says exactly what he does say in the poem that follows. Looking through the hymn, you see mentions made of various aspects of the culture I introduced in such a hurry, a pastoral society who drove their herds around the grassy steppes. Although they will not have had experience of giant snakes, they did know of the cobra. However, as of 2013, it must be noted the penalty for killing a cobra in India is 6 years imprisonment because they're now endangered. The Vedic people will have known mountains. Oh, let me show you some photos here. A Central Eurasian steppe. The Vedic people will have known mountains, which will have been usually visible on the horizon in the east during whichever century you please of their migration. Their migration started from the foothills of the Ural Mountains and progressed until they were stopped by the Himalayas. They will have noticed that the plains on which their herds depended were watered by rivers. And look at that plain, no water in sight, very dry there. But I thought I had one where you can see a river along the edge. Well, that's a shame. That's a pity. So they will have noticed that the plains were watered by rivers, and that these rivers always flowed away from the mountains. So when Indra, quote, killed the dragon and pierced an opening for the waters, the poet says he split open the bellies of mountains. He killed the dragon who lay upon like a cow rushed straight down the sea. And in verse 4, we saw that Indra not only got the water flowing, but also performed some other steps in setting up the world for humans. Verse 4 says, when you killed the firstborn of dragons, at that very moment, you brought forth the sun, the sky, and dawn. And then towards the end, in verse 14, there is mention of an eagle crossing the realms of earth and air, which will have been a common sight in an area where to this day they hunt with falcons. A different translation of this hymn has falcon instead of eagle. Finally, in verse 15 comes a reference to car parts, namely the parts of a chariot's wheel. Here we are, where it says that Indra ruled the people as their king, encircling all this as a rim encircles spokes. Now, for the chariot, the wheel was the hardest part to manufacture and required the best woodworkers. The difference between a real chariot and any old wagon, by the way, even a war wagon, is that a chariot, to be a chariot, you have to have spokes in your wheels. The invention of the spoked wheel was a Bronze Age innovation in military technology by the ancestors of the Vedic people. The second hardest part of the chariot to make was the nave or axle box. And you can see the nave sticking out from this spoked wheel here. A well-made axle box was said by poets to make a sound like singing when running at speed. And this is also something in ancient Greek poetry. The Vedic poets frequently compare their own poems to chariots because they say they are craftsmen like the chariot makers. Here in our poem, however, Indra is compared to the wheels. Now, our hymn keeps going back to a drink named Soma. This was a stimulating concoction made from a plant that went extinct due probably to overharvest. The best modern guess, as I said earlier, was that it was a form of ephedra that does still grow wild in Afghanistan, but it's just not the same. It doesn't have the same powers at all. The ancients report that it was becoming scarcer. It was an object of concern when they started to run out of it. The drug does not seem to have survived into the age of the Upanishads, and it is gone by the time of the Mahabharata. And those are both books that we'll be reading in the fall. The Mahabharata is the tutorial of Asian classical traditions this fall. The warrior, who was the Soma ritual, sometimes sharing it with others and pressing the juice out of the stalk of the plant was one whole step in the liturgy. So the liturgy of the ritual involved basically, taking the plant from a raw state and producing a liquid beverage out of it.
Kendall, could you restart that sentence? The sentence started with the warrior.
Oh, yes. The warrior who was the patron of the poet is the guy who would drink the soma at the ritual. Sometimes he would share it with others. And it was a whole step in the liturgy and the ritual to produce the beverage from the raw plant. Every step was sacred. They thought that the substance enhanced performance in combat and when raiding other people's cattle. It's hard to say from a clinical perspective how inebriated and hopped up the Soma drinkers would feel, but in a famous Vedic hymn, the poet may give us an idea when he chants, "We have drunk the Soma, we have have become immortal. We have gone to the light. We have found the gods. And so by this point, I hope that your appetite is whetted for some more background and introduction to the people who produced these hymns. So now let's take it from the top, as it were, by asking the big picture question. Were the Aryan tribe? My video went away. There we are. It's hard to describe the people who composed the Rigveda. This is due to an almost complete lack of evidence outside the Rigveda itself. There are no archaeological sites that belong to them indisputably. They did not build, although they eventually settled down. In the centuries during which the poets were composing the hymns, they seem to have lived entirely on the hoof in a fully pastoral lifestyle, where entire communities moved with enormous herds over the face of the vast steppe, and eventually moving into the Indian subcontinent. We'll discuss the pastoral lifestyle in a moment because we do know a bit about it from other communities of Indo-Iranians. There is an archaeological context that relates to the places and centuries when the Aryans were moving in and settling down. It only relates to them, however. It does not directly attest them. I mean the famous IVC, the Indus Valley civilization of the Bronze Age. The IVC was one of the world's primary civilizations that arose after the Neolithic age in river valleys. It belongs on the list of the civilizations that grew up during the same time frame between 4000 and 3000 BC. The list includes the Nile Valley with the Egyptian civilization, and in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and then in China the Yellow River Valley. World. In these places emerged the first cities, roughly. Let's see here. I've changed the number. Yeah, so between 4 and 3000 BC, are when these riverine civilizations with their cities arose. Now, the main sites of the Indus Valley civilization are Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Either before or perhaps during the arrival of the Aryans. We do not know why the whole system collapsed, but as you may imagine, many scholars suspect the Aryans. But trust me when I say that the archaeological record does not suggest, although it does not contradict, the claim that the IVC system fell to the chariot warriors who chanted the Vedic hymns. Although the cities did fall, there is no evidence that the population left the area. Indeed, linguists infer that the great family of Dravidians in Pakistan descend from the speech of the IVC folks. Further, the speakers of these languages seem to have absorbed the Aryans among themselves, and through processes of syncretism, they blended together the religion of the Aryan chariot warriors with their own local traditions and practices to produce what ultimately, centuries later, became known as Hinduism. Eventually, cities arose again and are seen in the heroic time period that is remembered in the epic poem of the Mahabharata. All this to say, archaeology tells us more about the original local population of the areas the Aryans entered than about the Aryans themselves, and about the Aryans' own descendant communities once they were blended in. Now, there are other ancient peoples who inform our picture of the Aryans by comparison. But first, let me show you a map here of the area. I'm having a hard time seeing the top of my image. Oh, so this is the IVC phase. And then here comes another map from a different phase. Oh, well, I don't know where my other map went. This is a photo of Mohenjo-Daro. And then I'm going to click again. We'll see this same site, but next to one of the beneath the figure, there are some seal stamps, And there's a great water buffalo. Actually, there's a couple of great water buffaloes and an elephant. The Harappan people left behind lots of great seal stones in their archaeology. But as I was saying, there are other ancient peoples who inform our picture of the Aryans by using the comparative method to compare the evidence. As you may already know, there is a set of languages on Earth called the Indo-European languages, all of which are related to each other. Not only languages currently spoken, but also ancient languages such as ancient Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit. All the Indo-European languages seem to derive from a language called Proto-Indo-European. Please note that this language may have been a group of closely related dialects rather than one monolithic language. PIE, as it's called, so you don't have to say Proto-Indo-European all the time, its so-called daughter language by around 2800 to 2500 BCE. These daughter languages included the ancestor.
So
yes,
we heard PIE, and then it got really garbled. So
yeah, well you're missing the good stuff. PIE now seems to scholars to have disintegrated into its so-called daughter languages by around 2800 to 2500 BCE. These daughter languages included the ancestor of Sanskrit and all Iranian languages called Indo-Iranian, as well as Proto-Greek and other proto-languages such as Proto-Germanic, Proto-Italo-Celtic, and so on. By around 1800 to 1500, Indo-Iranian seems to have branched out into Old Indic, which is written in Sanskrit in the Rigveda, and also into the different for all these languages now seems to have been originally in the region of the Pontic-Caspian steppes for PIE, so those photos that we were seeing of the steppe region. From this really large area, here's the chart of languages. This is the language tree with Proto-Indo-European. The geography, all these, here we are, for all these area, I'm not sure if my cursor is apparent to you, but where it says Proto-Indo-European homeland. And this is an area, of course, which is, presently very much in the news and in modern day Ukraine and the border with Russia. And notice the Caucasus Mountains form a sort of southern border to this area. From this really large area, there came several large outmigrations. The largest was into Western Europe in about, I believe, 2500. So the image that you're looking at right now is one of a phase. So I'm going to click through and you're going to watch the dispersal of the Proto-Indo-European or of the Indo-European language speakers as they move out across the map. So it says Yamna culture. That's for the Yamnaya people. That's the technical archaeology name for the Proto-Indo-European speakers, the best guess of who they are. And then here's the next step, the Danube Valley. So the Yamnaya moved in there and they started burying people in their a very distinctive way. And then the Anatolians, this is where the Hittites come from in modern day Turkey. And then there's a very interesting group of people that became the Afanasyevo culture. We'll leave them alone though because they're not really part of our story. And then the Danube Valley extends and you're moving into Central Europe. And then here comes two new branches, and they end up forming the corded ware culture. Archaeology, that's their name. Now watch from the corded people. Oh wait, no, not yet. Here comes Greek. So Greek and Armenian have appeared. Those languages are very closely related historically, and they are both very closely related to Sanskrit as well. Happens next. And some folks from the Yamna founded animating this outmigration. And the Sintashta people seem to have been the Indo-Iranians and they expanded their area, but also adopted some other folks' materials. They start and Novo. Very interesting, but that's not our lecture. And then you see it says BMAC. That's
Kendall,
Bactria
could you
Margiana
back up a few
Archaeological
sentences?
Complex. And yes,
Could you back up a few sentences? We heard
yes,
about the Yamna
except
culture
I'm extemporizing. Let's see.
influencing various other cultures. That's where we lost you.
Okay, how about Sintashta? Did you see the Sintashta people appear there?
The PowerPoint presentation is skipping a bit along with your video, so we can see them now.
Ah, okay. So this is the Sintashta people. That's the archaeology name for the people that we think were the speakers of Indo-Iranian. So this is the ancestor culture. The next step is for these people to become the Vedic, Rigvedic culture, and also the ancient Iranians. So that's Sintashta. More on them in just a little bit. They invented the chariot. And then they expand their area, but certain changes in their culture require a new name for archaeologists, Andro Novo. And then you see BMAC appearing right below the big Andro Novo blob. BMAC are non-Indo-European speakers, but they had a very distinctive culture that influenced Indo-Iranians as they moved through the area. We think maybe Soma came from BMAC. And now the next click. There we are. Now you see the Vedic people have moved from BMAC down into modern day India. And you'll see that there's also a line that goes straight over where it is, and I don't think it's very clear, is Mitanni. That's modern day Syria. This is the final phase. This is the distribution of Indo-European languages during
Kendall, I'm going to ask you to back up
right
again.
up before tech program curriculum start. Okay, the distribution of the Indo-European languages in the Iron Age. So this is the way things looked. Or I should say the way things sounded, right before the period where basic program texts begin to be produced. So right before Homer and right before the Archaic Greek period.
Kendall, I'm going to ask you to back up again. So you said this is the final phase, and then we lost you for a few sentences.
Yeah.
And I think it might be wise for us to stop your video
Okay.
to try to
I'm going to try,
put less demand on your machine.
Yes, good idea. Let's see if that works.
Okay.
So do I need to repeat this point again? This is the final phase of
That's where you
for
should
ancient. Okay. So this is the way the Indo-European languages right before the period you know from the basic program culture. From the basic program ancient Greek text starting. So as I was saying a while ago when we were watching the animation, as it were, is at about this time, the speakers of Indo-Iranian moved eastward into the foothill. I'm going to go back and show you. I'm going to line this up better. Okay, right here, this step, from here to here. The speakers of Indo-Iranian moved eastward in the steppe region into the foothills of the Ural Mountains along certain rivers in the region. They settled down, and remarkable cities, which have told archaeologists culture, is called the culture, and the war chariot, and engaged in the main activities we will see in the Rigveda, namely cattle raiding and warfare, and generally the lifestyle of a warrior aristocrat. The reason you did not learn about the Sintashta culture in school is because the archaeology and all the big discoveries happened behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, Western archaeologists began communicating with their post-Soviet colleagues and translating
Kendall,
is the main book to read about the
I
name
think
called The Horse, the Yes, sir.
um, there were 4 or 5 sentences that were garbled and a series of jumps in the PowerPoint presentation. So could you back up, say, to the slide in which the Sintashta people first appeared, and then take us from there?
So there's where the Sintashta people appear, and they move to the foothills of the Ural Mountains, and there they stopped being pastoral nomads, and they built cities, and the cities have been found now since 1970 by archaeologists, and the cities and archaeologists have learned a lot about these people from these cities. The culture is called Sintashta after a local site. The people who lived there invented the chariot and engaged in the main activities we will see in the Rigveda, namely cattle raiding and warfare. And generally, they lived the lifestyle of a warrior. The reason you did not learn about the Sintashta culture in school is because the archaeology and all the big discoveries happened behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. After the fall of the Berlin into this topic is by the archaeologist David Anthony, and it is called The Horse, the Wheel, and Language, How Bronze Age Writers from the Steppe Shaped the Modern World. So
Kendall,
rather suddenly,
I'm going to ask you to go back
yes,
again.
sir.
We got till after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then you cut out.
Oh, wow. So after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Western archaeologists began communicating with their post-Soviet colleagues and translating this knowledge from Russian into Western languages. The main book to read is on your screen. It's called The Horse, the Wheel, and Language, How Bronze Age Writers from the Eurasian Steppes Shaped the Modern World. So the Sintashta people, and we're in the time frame right now, 2200 to 2000 BC, rather suddenly, the Sintashta people changed. They closed up shop and began doing things differently. They morphed into the Andronovo culture, which covered a larger area on the map, as we saw. And it stretched us southwards towards India. And this is the stage just before the Vedic people separate from the Iranians as both move south, but each on a different side of the Caspian Sea. It seems that during the second millennium, that is between 2000 BC and 1000 BC, the Andronovo horizon emitted several groups of various sizes of chariot warriors into the Indian subcontinent, into or up onto the Iranian plateau, into the kingdom of ancient Syria, known as Mitanni, all the way down into Egypt. And there's a slide missing. All the way down into Egypt. Okay, sorry about that. All the way down into Egypt, where they were called the Hyksos, and in Babylon, where they were known as the Kassites. It's a minority view, but they seem also to have sent a contingent into Greece, where they may have become the shaft-grave princes who introduced the chariot and the horse to the Greeks. The people who did not migrate outward stayed put in the Pontic-Caspian steppes, where by 1000 BC, they had morphed into the speakers of the Iranian or Aka, the Sarmatians, the Cimmerians, and probably also the Thracians. All of these groups are discussed in Herodotus in the 5th century. Herodotus is our source for the claim that the Scythians used the seeds of the cannabis plant ritually to alter their consciousnesses. Of course, this reminds us of Soma among the Vedic people centuries earlier. These Iranian groups went on to survive as groups for about 1,000 years, well into the heyday of the Roman Empire. They never go away, though, although they do morph into different peoples and modify their languages over time. During the Roman era, there arose the powerful Iranian kingdom on the Pontic steppes, ruled by Mithridates, for those of you who've been in the Roman sequence. So in India and Iran, the pastoral peoples moved as groups of whole communities. This is hard to imagine, but historically speaking, it happened a lot, even into the 20th century. The Scythians still lived in this mode during the time of the classical Greeks, and Herodotus tells us that they carried everything they needed in great numbers of enormous wagons. All of these peoples were ferociously effective horse warriors, first with the chariot and then later on horseback after the Scythians invented the stirrup. In general, the Indo-Iranian peoples were very mobile, and even after a few centuries living in towns, they would often revert to more completely pastoral ways. This tendency began back in the earlier times of the Proto-Indo-European speakers, who are called the Yamnaya people, as we saw on the map. They began the lifestyle of migrating with herds across the steppes as complete communities carrying all their belongings on wagons that were sometimes of such imagination. For example, they seem to have hauled their own water in giant tanker wagons pulled by teams of oxen, and this is in the Middle Bronze Age. Whole community migration seems to account for the appearance in Western Europe of the speakers of the ancestor languages of Germanic, Baltic, and Italo-Celtic, and the other European languages. So, from the beginning, speakers of Proto-Indo-European lived a pastoral lifestyle, moving as entire around the Central Asian steppes until eventually groups of them kept moving Western Europe until they settled down in places along the Danube Valley and ultimately the Baltic region, Germany and Italy. Speakers of Celtic settled in France, Spain, and the British Isles, including Scotland and Ireland, and we will come back to the Celts in just a little bit. Now, this is one model of migration that was used when a whole pastoral community uproots and seeks a new home. There was another model. And in this other model, just a few warriors go, along with the craftsmen and other support they need to build chariots and to breed and train horses. These chariot warriors would simultaneously introduce the chariot to a kingdom and somehow or other take over the government, but without changing the society. Possibly, one theory is that they would marry into the king's family. The main military advisor would marry in. This was the model they used in Egypt. This is the model they used in Egypt, where the Egyptians called them the Hyksos, in Babylon, where they called them the Kassites, in Mitanni, where they were called the Marianu. The archaeology of Mitanni in modern-day Syria has produced, let's see, how's my connection, Noah? I just got a message.
Just now, it's been
good?
Pretty good, yeah. I don't want to curse us.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm gonna venture some slides here. This is a book cover, but you can ignore that fact. It's the photo or the painting is from National Geographic. These are steppe people. These are the Scythians, and the clothing and the hats are in archaeology, so they're recreated by the National Geographic artist. Here's the slide that I was looking for. By the way, that book is a good book, though. But that's a famous and their garb culture war. We have no information on what they looked like. So now look at Mitanni there. This is an archaeological site in modern day Syria, and it has produced the oldest attestation of Sanskrit in the form of an inscription that names 4 of the most prominent gods from the Rigveda: Mithra or Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and the Ashvin twins. And this is an inscription from Syria in 1400 BC. This is the first written, the earliest written Sanskrit that we have. It, of course, is written in cuneiform in that script. One problem that we have is, what was Sanskrit doing being spoken in Syria in the 1400s BC? One possible solution is that it was actually Iranian, but at a stage when it was still so very similar to Sanskrit that it would be hard to tell them apart. Whichever solution is correct, still, it's a very remarkable thing to read the Rigveda, as we will this fall, where pastoral warriors and their bards sing hymns about these gods, about Mithra, Varuna, and the Ashvin twins, and our very own Indra, while at the same time over in ancient Syria, the same type of chariot warriors were worshiping, riding, and fighting in much the same way, but in a very different context. What is more, a man from Mitanni literally wrote the book on horse training in the Bronze Age. His name was Kikuli, and his manual on horse training was translated into multiple languages, written in ancient cuneiform for several centuries, and in the original language used the numerals for 1, 2, and 3 that are the same in Sanskrit. Kikuli himself was probably an Iranian or a descendant of a trainer who came with the Marianu and the horse. While Kikuli was training horses in Mitanni in Syria, and others were doing so using his book as a guide, north of him, up in the steppe region, the Iranian peoples called the Scythians were making advances in horse breeding that changed the world. And let's look at them again. There they are. Contemporary research into the genome of the modern domesticated bloodline established by the Scythians in the first millennium BC. Yes, sir? Yes.
Started the sentence in which you started telling us about what the genome tells us about the modern blood under the horses. You cut out. Could you start that sentence again, please?
Yes. So contemporary research says into genetics of the horse that all horses alive today are descended from the first millennium BC. They built vast wealth by trading horses with the civilizations on the periphery of the Central Eurasian steppe region, from Europeans in the West all the way east to Western China. Yes, China. By 1000 BCE, in China, the Shang dynasty had received the horse and chariot, and where there were chariots, there were Indo-Iranians. Let's see here. Now, the people who speak the language descended from ancient Scythian seem to live today in Ossetia, and to speak Ossetian. This is on the eastern coast of the Black Sea. The descendants of other ancient Iranian groups are now known as the Kurds, who live in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, the Persians, who live in Iran, and several groups who live in Afghanistan and Pakistan, especially speakers of the predominant Pashto language in that area. The unfortunate Yazidi people who have been in Western news in the last 10 years are also Iranian. As late as the 1920s, and that's the 1920s, an Iranic people known as the Bakhtiari were still living the pastoral lifestyle and would drive enormous herds and flocks over vast distances and through challenging obstacles every season. You may watch them do so in the documentary film from 1925 called Grass. This technique for living lasted from the Bronze Age until practically yesterday. We should imagine our Vedic warriors, their poets, and their god Indra as all living this style of life. And now I'm going to show you some movie posters from that documentary. So this is still footage from that documentary. And you see it's, they're using camera. Then horses, but you can see the steppe region. Well, it's not the steppe region, but it's a plain in the background. And here they're horses and animals. They swim across the river. And all the people, everything has to go across this river. And they used to do this every year. I think they stopped because of World War II, but they still. And here they are. And then another connection between ancient Iranians is the prevalence of women warriors. The ancient Iranian people, known as the Sarmatians, seem to be the historical origin of the myths of the Amazons because they left behind barrows or Kurgan warrior tombs containing female remains and the weapons found otherwise with male remains. Of course, at the present time, the Kurds in their various locations are known for particularly ferocious women warriors who terrify the misogynist fighters of the Islamic State, much as the way the Amazons terrified the ancient Greeks. Fighting from horseback levels the advantage. A large, heavier body is on foot. And here's another headline of Kurdish female warriors. Now, the name Amazon, well, yeah, we'll go ahead and have that photo. The name refers to the myth that for the sake of archery, the Amazon warriors would remove the right breast. And that's how you get the word. Well, where's my word? Okay. They would remove their right breast. And so means non and Mazdan means breast. The famous Parthian shot required the horse rider to rotate at the waist in the saddle counterclockwise to aim the bow at a target from which the horse was running away. In basketball terms, this would be a turnaround fadeaway, impossible to defend against. I should note that the trend toward having women warriors sprang up on the Iranian side after the geographic split between Iranians and Indians, and after the introduction of the stirrup, giving the advantage over chariots to single-mounted archers. By contrast, our Vedic poets are very androcentric. So let's return to our Vedic poets now. There are two groups of people to consider, plus two groups of text. You will have noticed that I've spoken of the poets who were the Vedic priests who composed these hymns. You will remember also that I said these hymns were composed and their authors and patrons between 1500 BCE and 1000 BCE.
Hey, Kendall.
I also said they were composed orally and not written down. Yes, back up.
Yeah, we heard you say they're authors, and I believe you were going to say patrons, maybe, but that's where. Please back up to there.
Okay, yeah, you read my mind. So the their authors and patrons lived between 1500 and 1000 BC. I also said a while ago that the hymns were composed orally and not written down for centuries. You may have noticed that these. Why did they stop around 1000 BC? And if they stopped, then who started memorizing and preserving their poems? How could the text possibly survive through 3,000 years without being written down? The answers to all these questions require us to look into some specifics about the Sanskrit language and also at evidence based on the comparative method. The comparative method in Indo-European studies finds parallels in the surviving evidence of the various ancient peoples who spoke Indo-European languages. So let's deal first with how the texts survived with fidelity. The short answer is that they were memorized in an organized fashion by many people every generation who checked each other's work. The slightly longer answer is that these memorizers exploited a feature of the way the Sanskrit language is pronounced to create a second metatext. This metatext served not just as a backup copy of all the information in the Rigveda, but expressed a level of phonological analysis that was missing in the hymns, the actual hymns, as they would have been uttered aloud. All of this was done by word for 3,000 years. The feature of Sanskrit that made this metatext possible is a set of pronunciation rules called sandhi, which means combination. When you look a Sanskrit word up in the dictionary, it probably ends with a letter, that is to say, a sound, that is different from the one you will see actually used in particular texts. The reason is that the speakers were sensitive to how different sounds would clash when one of them ended a word right before another sound at the beginning of the next word. Consequently, they used certain rules of combination, sandhi, to modify usually the final sound of the first word so that it sounds nice, coming right before the sound that starts the next word. And here are two examples. So the original words, as you'd look them up in the dictionary, are to the left of the arrow. Gachami, iti, and vadati. This translates, well, after the arrow, you would pronounce it as gachamiti vadati. I'm going, he said. And then the second is agnis. You would look it up, the word for fire. And then eva, the word for like or just as. The S changes to an R because final S, according to rules of sandhi, just doesn't sound right coming right before a vowel. So you change it to an R, and to the original speakers, that's what it takes to sound right. In these two examples, the part after the arrow is the proper Sanskrit expression. This is the way the Rigvedic text sounds. and it's the way the language is spoken and written. But to the left of the arrow, we have our meta text, where the final sounds of the words are different than they are after the arrow. This meta text, with words appearing in their pre-combination forms, helped the memorizers prevent mistakes in the post-arrow text by reminding them of analytical information that is only implicit in the spoken version. Now, the Rigveda consists of 10 mandalas, or books, and a total of 1,008 hymns. You are to believe that material was not only memorized, you are to believe that it was memorized twice in two different editions, as it were, with
Kendall?
we lacked evidence of something similar elsewhere. Yes, sir?
I'm going to ask you to back up to the beginning of your explanation.
Shall I back up?
Of the that's associated with the material you've got in the PowerPoint right now, the 10 mandalas and the 1,028 hymns.
So, did you hear all about the meta text?
Yes.
And the arrow?
Yes. Yes. You should.
Sanskrit words.
Yes, you should begin with your explanation of that was associated with.
You're actually frozen to me, Noah. Oh, good. That's good. Now, the Rigveda consists of 10 mandalas, or books, and a total of 1,028 hymns. You are revised twice in different editions, as difficult to believe if we lacked evidence of something similar elsewhere. And we do have such evidence. Evidence of groups of memory experts comes to us from other ancient or medieval Indo-European cultures. Basic program students will remember the Homeric bard, like the one who appears in Homer's Odyssey, a blind singer of tales. But the Homeric bard is only one type of Indo-European bard or poet. There were others. In pre-literate societies, the entire culture, literally everything known, is carried in people's heads and shared by word of mouth. What is not memorized is not remembered. What is not remembered is forgotten. What is forgotten is gone forever. Different societies have solved this problem different ways. Among the Proto-Indo-European speakers in the Middle Bronze Age, they solved it by making the memory experts the, quote, highest paid professional, close quote, that's a prominent scholar, next to the warrior class. Julius Caesar is one source for the bardic class among the Celts. Caesar called the Celts Gauls. The Celts called their bards Druids. Caesar describes the Druids in them to memorizing something like the Rigveda. In his book, The Gallic Wars, Caesar relates that the Druids held a social position equal in honor to that of the warriors. The Druids manage all religious functions and apparently all judicial functions as well. Young men flocked to the Druids because of the high status, but also because of the exemptions from military service and paying taxes. Caesar tells us, quote, induced by such great advantages, many embrace this profession of their own accord, and many are sent to it by their parents and relations. They are said to learn by heart a number of verses. Accordingly, some in the course of training 20, nor do they regard it lawful to commit these to writing, though in almost all other matters in their public and private transactions, they use Greek letters. That practice they seem to me to have adopted for two reasons: because they neither desire their doctrines to be divulged among the mass of the people, nor those who learn to devote themselves the less to the efforts of memory, relying on writing, since it generally occurs to most men that in their dependence on writing, they relax their diligence in learning thoroughly and their employment of the memory. Close quote from that passage. But Caesar also says that the Celts in France received the institution of Druidism from the Celts in the British Isles, who are called the Britons. He says, this institution is supposed to have been devised in Britannia and to have been brought over from it into Gaul, France. And now those who desire to gain a more accurate knowledge of that system generally proceed thither for the purpose of studying it. This institution seems to have survived in the British Isles, in Ireland specifically, even after the successive takeover of the British Isles by various German groups between 500 AD and 1066. The German groups that I mean are the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, the Frisians, and ultimately the Normans. But out west in Ireland, in the so-called Celtic fringe, they eluded the Germanic grasp until Tudor times, and in the institution of the bardic and the until the cultural of the earls. Here is a passage written by, yes, sir?
I'm going to ask
Yes.
you to back up until when you mentioned the Tudor times. So you were about to describe things involving the earls in Ireland.
Ah, yes. So let's see, how far back do I need to go? The institution of the bardic vocation lasted. So Caesar's writing in 50 BC. The bardic vocation lasted in Ireland until the flight of the earls in 1607. It actually persisted a little bit, but that's when the death started. But here comes a passage written by a man who attended the so-called bardic school in the early 1600s. His name was Thomas O'Sullivan. I will quote the entire passage, which is good. So if we lose connection, just keep reading. You'll know what I'm saying. Because this passage presents several details that tell us what was going on in Ireland that matches what must have been going on in India for 3,000 years, especially in the terms of memory work and the emphasis on getting the words just right. So Thomas O'Sullivan writes of the school he went to when he was a lad, quote, the poetical seminary or school was open only to such as were descended of poets. So like the Vedic poets, it runs in the family, and reputed within their tribes. The structure was a snug, low hut, and beds in it at convenient distances, each with a small apartment without much furniture of any kind, save only a table, some seats, and a conveniency for clothes to hang upon. No windows to let in the day, nor any light at all used but that of candles, and these brought in at a proper season only. The professors, one or more as there was occasion, gave a subject suitable to the capacity of each class, determining the number of rhymes, and clearing what was to be chiefly observed therein as to syllables, quartans, concord, correspondence, termination, and union, each of which were restrained by peculiar rules. The said subject, either one or more as aforesaid, having been given overnight, they worked it apart, each by himself, upon his own bed, the whole next day in the dark, till at a certain hour in the night, lights being brought in, they committed it to writing. Being afterwards dressed and come together in a large room where the masters waited, each scholar gave in his performance, which being corrected or approved of, either the same or fresh against the next day. And that's the end of our passage. Similarly, the Vedic hymns were composed and memorized for generations by bards and poets whose family had established it as their specialty. Unlike the comparative evidence from the Gauls and the Irish, our evidence for the Vedic hymn composers does not speak to the particulars of their training, but they do compare their poetic works proudly to the best carpentry, as I mentioned earlier, to chariotry. Where the Irish bards learned subjects including concord, termination, and union, we should surely recognize something like the rules of Sandhi in Sanskrit, which shaped the metatext our Vedic bards used. In Ireland, in Celtic Gaul, and in ancient India, there was an importance placed on the spoken word, on getting the spoken word just right, that you and I have to reconstruct to appreciate. And I'm going to quote now a passage from the introduction to the modern English translation of the whole Rigveda, because here the translators, two can help us more efficiently and with more authority than I have to reconstruct the mindset that places overriding importance on words of power. Quote, one reason for the intricacy of Rigvedic poetry and the careful thought that the Rigvedic poets put into it is the importance that Vedic culture attached to the spoken word and to the truth that it embodied. The elegantly formulated truth, spoken in a ritual context, was powerful. The word for truth is rta, a crucially resonant word that, with some reason, some other translators have rendered as order or cosmic order. The term rta essentially defines what a being or object is and what it does, and it structures the relationships of beings and objects with other beings and objects. By speaking these truths of essence and relationship, the poets could make the truths real and actual in the present. So, for example, the great Indra hymn, which, by the way, is Book 1, 32, and we heard it all completely a few minutes ago. The great Indra hymn begins, now I shall proclaim the heroic deeds of Indra, those foremost deeds which the mace wielder performed. So why does the poet proclaim these deeds? It is not simply to honor the god, although his proclamation surely does do that. It is also to state the truth of these heroic deeds so that these deeds will become real once again. As Indra once before smashed Vrtra, who was the symbol and epitome of all obstacles, so once again he will smash obstacles. Formulating the truth of Indra is part of what makes Indra real and present. This word for cosmic truth, and indeed this form of ritual, are reflected in evidence we have for ancient Iranian religion. Iranian language and religion did become different from Indian language and religion and was practiced very far away from India in Iran or Persia. But even in the time of Cyrus the Great, in the 6th century, their method of sacrifice reflects a kinship with the sacrifices for which our Indian poets composed the Rigveda. Pretty complex and involves several persons, including the sacrificer or patron, attendants to play various roles, such as consecrating an area on the ground, and a priest figure to chant a hymn to a god. Here is what Herodotus says about Persian or Iranian religion. I quote the parts that show a striking similarity. He says, if someone wants to sacrifice to one of the gods, he leads an animal to a place that is free of pollution, he means ritual pollution, and calls upon the god, wearing a tiara made preferably of myrtle branches. He then divides the sacrificial victim into portions, boils the meat, and places it on a prepared bed of the softest grasses possible, preferably clover. Once he has set it all out, a magus stands beside it and chants a history of the gods, which is how they refer to their invocation. Indeed, it is not their custom to perform sacrifices without having a magus present. Close quote. As we have seen in ancient India, the Vedic sacrifice was impossible without the cousin of the magus, the poet, called in Sanskrit the rishi or kavi. Now I've gone on too long, but we've covered a lot of ground. Believe me, there is more to cover. But this is a good stopping place for an introduction to the Rigveda and the people who composed and preserved it, so long as we agree that we're just getting started. And that's the end. And I'm going to come back visibly. So I apologize for that. I think those tech problems are on my end.
Well, Kendall, we have 2 questions. I think you could probably take these quickly.
All righty.
The first one is from Charles Fout. The question is, do you have any thoughts on indigenous Aryanism? He says, some Hindu nationalists argue that there was no Aryan invasion or migration.
Is the form of the question about that? Is that so? I don't. I really don't know much about the present Hindu nationalism at all.
Great, and we have one final question. It comes from Ray Lucchese,
Right.
to log off, but his question was, it's interesting that
Thanks, Ray.
it's interesting that the number one god was a thunder hurler like Zeus or Jupiter. Is there some link to Greek myth here?
Yes. Yes. So like if I went on to like give part two of an introduction, there is the comparison between the it's really systematic among their gods. Now Indra, the name, is not linked to Zeus, the name, but there is a reflex in Sanskrit for the word Zeus. He's minor. The name Varuna, who's one of the four gods that's attested in that Sanskrit inscription from 1400 BC. Varuna's name is cognate with Ura, who is the grandfather of Zeus. So you take off the V, you can kind of see it, if you squint and close your eyes just right, you can see that Varuna and Uranos share an ancestor in Proto-Indo-European. So it's a thunder. Indra gets the thunderbolt and gets to use it as a weapon, and he has a lot of for fans, and I don't know if there's this hymn out there, but the Homeric hymn to Apollo. When I say that I was just getting started on the introduction, I mean it's for real. I mean there's so much to say beforehand, and that's why it's almost best just to jump straight into the water. But in the Homeric hymn to Apollo, Apollo kills the dragon, and that's how he founds Delphi. And myth itself is cognate. And the phrase "he killed the dragon," quote unquote, that has cognates in several, really rather many Indo-European poetic traditions. Think of like Saint George, always depicted standing on a dragon. He did it too, and it's this phrase "he killed the dragon" that it comes through in I think it's 3 syllables or 4 syllables. That like each language transforms this poetic phrase into ancient Greek or into Sanskrit or into Persian or into German or into Irish. It's really something. It is the levels of connections. Well, they're a lot of fun. Full stop.
All right. Well, Kendall, that was a fascinating and hugely ambitious lecture. Thank you to everybody for sticking around. Sorry about those technical problems. I suppose one upside is this is a good way to figure out who is just diehard in their commitment to the basic program and their events. Kendall's, I believe, started a tradition for these lectures that I am going to keep up, which is that in just a moment, I'm going to unmute everyone present and let you all thank Kendall by clapping and expressing your thanks verbally. So let me stop the recording, unmute everyone, and then we will thank Kendall. Here we go.